Hey guys, so real quick intro before we jump into the meat of the video. This is a predictions video for the 3 shorts categories at the 2026 Oscars. Also, I apologize in advance for all the changes in scenery and changes in audio quality and production value. I have watched all but 2 of the shorts across the 3 categories, and I'm really sorry this is so late. I hope some of you get a chance to watch it before making your predictions for the nominations that come out Thursday morning. To give you an idea of if I'm any good at this or not, I usually get at least 3 of 4 correct in each shorts category for the nominations. I'll talk a lot about review aggregate sites like IMDb and Letterboxd during the video, but it is important to bear in mind that especially with Letterboxd, you gotta be cautious with reviews that lean in either an extreme negative or extreme positive direction. Occasionally they are influenced by kind of the broad politic of the Letterboxd community, which is very left-leaning. So if you have a film that has some sort of perceived problematic content, often there will be a sort of dogpile effect. So you gotta just be aware of that. One thing to bear in mind when you're doing predictions for shorts is that the aggregate punditry sites like Gold Derby and Awards Expert often aren't great for these categories because the community odds, aggregated odds, are based off whatever order, usually alphabetized, that the lists were put on the site in the first place. So you have to bear that in mind. I made a list ranking my personal preference of all 43 shorts that I've seen. It's on my Letterboxd, and I'll link it in the description below. I'll also link a list that is not mine, but that another Letterboxd user created that links all of the places where you can watch the short films in the short list. So that's really helpful.
So yeah, let's start with animated short. And what I'll be doing for all of these categories is going 1 through 15 of what I believe stands the best chance. In general, this is a pretty hard category because there's nothing that's really lauded and nothing that's really derided. So honestly, everything has some sort of a shot, I would say. The only film, honestly, out of this shortlist that I'm very confident will make the final 5 is Snow Bear. This comes from director Aaron Blaise, the director of Brother Bear, that I believe is his only feature director credit. But he's worked in animation for many years, and this is really a gorgeous film, especially in the visual style. It took him 3 years to make. It is independently produced. I believe it's all hand-drawn 2D animation. You really could frame any shot from this movie. And it is a really touching story. I went into it a bit cynical and I found it a tad schmaltzy, but by the end it really moved me. And the other thing about this is that both the Film Twitter Letterboxd side, which can be a bit more criticky, and average IMDb users and whatnot seem to really unanimously love this. So it does have that across the board appeal. It really checks a lot of the boxes. The second film on my list is Butterfly. This is a 15-minute French animated short about a Jewish swimmer, Olympic swimmer at the 1936 Olympic Games who faces a bunch of anti-Semitism, and it's based on a true story. The animation is really what stand out here. Often you'll find shorts in this category that are very uniquely animated, and this is done with, I believe, oil paintings. Each frame is hand painted, and it has this sort of Vincent van Gogh-esque style, and it really stands out. Also an emotional story with some prescient subject matter. Third on my list is Playing God. This is a 9-minute stop motion film, and the stop motion work here is excellent. It's some of the most stunning animation across this entire shortlist. The subject matter is very dark, but stuff like this can get in. I'm thinking back to Wander to Wonder from last year. It's a kind of Frankenstein story about this mad sculptor who creates these humanoid figurines, but he kind of mangles them and abandons them, and it's very eerie, very unsettling, kind of body horror adjacent, but I thought it was extremely captivating and just awesome to look at, and a real feat of creativity. Fourth on my list is I Died in Irpin, and this is a bit of an interesting one that I really enjoyed, but I'm not necessarily super confident on. It's by a Ukrainian filmmaker, and it tells the story of being displaced because of the Russian invasion. It's done in kind of sketchy, mostly black and white, kind of crude, rudimentary animation, kind of similar to Don Hertzfeldt, if you're familiar with that filmmaker. But it's really effective, and it looks super unique. It's narrated the whole way through, and narration can sometimes bug me, but I thought it worked really well here, kind of first person narration from the main character, and there's a lot of interesting images. It's quite haunting, quite effective, and of course the subject matter is again very relevant to, you know, what's in the news and what the Academy tends to favor. Speaking of narration being used prominently, my fifth pick is The Quinta's Ghost, and this is a really stunningly wrought 17-minute Spanish film that is about the painter Goya. You may be familiar with his series of paintings called the Black Paintings, and this film covers the time in which he made those that series, where he lived in a villa or a house, and the film is actually narrated from the perspective of the house. Kind of walks the fine line between 2D and 3D animation. I'm not sure if I am correctly characterizing that, but at any rate, really lovely to look at. Maybe not the most creative style of animation, but I think a really well-made piece that will get a lot of high placements on ballots. So as it stands, the sixth film on my list is Forever Green. This is a 13-minute short, again about a bear, this time a little abandoned cub in the forest who gets adopted by a kind of animate tree. It's very cute, but unlike Snow Bear, I did find it a bit more cloying, and while it is not panned by either Letterboxd or IMDb, I think it has a mid to high 3 on Letterboxd and a 7.5 or something like that on IMDb right now. I think audiences would agree that it is the lesser of the two. So in a year where there's two somewhat similar films, this is definitely the weaker.
Almost facetiously, I considered for a second the possibility of the two Bear films splitting votes, but I think that almost everyone would prefer Snow Bear over Forever Green, so I'm not too worried about that.
It's very glossily animated in a kind of 2D, 3D blend, and it looks very professional. It's by animators who have worked on a lot of big budget films in the past, Zootopia, Big Hero 6, and this is their first directorial effort. Overall, it's a little slight, a little forgettable, a little cutesy. Seventh on my list is The Girl Who Cried Pearls. This is a French-Canadian model stop-motion film produced by the National Film Board of Canada, which have had lots of nominations before. Also, these directors have been nominated once before for Madame Tootly Putly. I have not seen that short, but it was also in the animated short category. And the animation here is somewhat uncanny, but really cool, and I think the branch will really like it. It's quite memorable in that department. The story is maybe a bit quaint, and I found maybe this is just a personal nitpick, but I really thought the narration was hand-holding. But it's a cool and memorable story, even though it may not be as emotionally resonant as some of the stronger uh, shorts in the short list. I think it stands a decent chance, but this is a tough, cuspy one. Eighth on my list is Eru. I believe I'm pronouncing that correct. It's from Cartoon Saloon, which did Wolfwalkers, Song of the Sea, Secret of Kells. So definitely a lot of pedigree behind the studio, and it is of course like a Celtic, Irish set, folklorish tale about a little girl who has to who has aspirations of being a warrior and is of course mocked by her clan, but then may be able to gain them resources in a time of need. The story didn't do a lot for me, which is strange considering I have Irish roots and I usually connect to Irish stories immediately. But it seems to be received fairly well. It does have maybe the second to most mixed reviews on Letterboxd. You'll have to double check the IMDb score, but definitely the animation, like a lot of Cartoon Saloon stuff, is pretty striking, if not quite at that same level. So, definitely stands a shot by virtue of that alone. Autocar is next on my list. This is a short film about a little girl who is sent on a bus from Poland to Belgium, and she is surrounded by all these strange adults, and we very much see the happenings of the film through this child's perspective, and her perspective warps these people into different sort of animals, some scary and ferocious, some kinder. It's an interesting concept. I think it may leave a lot of viewers kind of thinking, what was the point of that? But I don't think anyone will really dislike it strongly. There are some really gorgeous images. There's one image involving a wolf woman and peacock feathers. If you've seen the film, perhaps you'll know what I'm talking about. That has stayed with me since I saw it a few weeks ago. The style is somewhat monochromatic, but punctuated by vibrant colors. Quite memorable, even if it's not in the upper echelon of animation quality. It has a very similar Letterboxd curve and IMDb rating to Forever Green. The next film I have here is The Night Boots. It's a 12-minute short, again, centering around a child, a little French boy who wanders out into the night, but it's not scary. It's somewhat endearing despite him meeting a few different types of creatures and monsters. Another one where the credits may roll and voters might think, what was the point of that? But it very much feels like a children's story, almost like a board book that a kid would read. It's similar to the style of a Henry Selick book, like Where the Wild Things Are in some ways.
Henry Selick, I obviously meant Maurice Sendak. Sorry about that.
Though I wouldn't say nearly as memorable, but it definitely endeared me, and the animation style is unique, so that could push it over the edge, but I think the safe bet is not to put this in your 5. Next on my list is a short called The Shyness of Trees. Definitely a pretty memorable one, even if it wasn't one of my favorites. I could see it being pretty high up on some voters' ballots. Again, kind of a Secret of Kells vibe in terms of the animation style, though not derivative in any way, but very nature oriented. There's a kind of poetic and symbolic exploration of grief. It is unique enough that it certainly stands a chance. If you can find this one, watch it for yourself because it's kind of hard to explain, and everyone's going to have a different take on it, I think. Next up, we have Hurricane. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It is a Hungarian short about a man with the head of a pig, I guess. No one asks any questions about that in the short. Everyone else is a human, and it is animated kind of like a noir-esque comic, I guess you would say, with lots of contrasty blacks and whites, and it is basically a story about this pig guy's night going very wrong because of his alcoholism, and yeah, another very memorable one. I certainly enjoyed it. I don't know if it will be everyone's flavor. Next up, we have The Three Sisters. It's directed by Konstantin Bronzit, who directed 2 shorts that have been nominated in the past. We Can't Live Without Cosmos, which I remember seeing and not liking very much, to be honest, and something else from 2009 that I won't even try to pronounce. But this one is quite unique and memorable. I know I've been saying this a lot, but it's definitely one of the more comic oriented shorts in this bunch, and it tells the story of 3 sisters who live on an island in the middle of the ocean, and it pretty much, there are 2 styles of shots, one wide shot of the entire tiny very round island and one closer shot of the 3 doorways of their houses where they enter and go back into, and there's a cycle of a couple different men who come off the island and the sisters are vying for their affection. It's pretty funny. I think the humor will land for most people, but maybe not all. The animation is somewhat rudimentary, but so were his other 2 shorts, and those got in. I'm not sure how many he's been snubbed for in the past, but yeah, certainly a funny one, so that alone might give it an edge. So we're coming to the end here. My next film is Retirement Plan. This is an Irish film, 7 minutes, distributed by the New York Times, as many of these short films are every year. And it's narrated by Domhnall Gleeson. I have it pretty low down, but if I'm being frank, it was one of my favorites. It really moved me emotionally. It's not only simple in its animation, but simple in its concept. It has animation that reminds me of, say, like a Pickles comic strip, dark outlines and uniformly colored characters, and it basically Domhnall Gleeson narrates from the perspective of this unnamed main character who says, "When I retire, I am going to do this and this and this," and he lists a bunch of things that he will do when he retires, which sounds extremely boring, but the way it is written, it really is very revelatory and has a lot of interesting insights into life and humanity. So I really like this. I feel like it might be a bit slight for the Academy's taste, and the animation is not at all memorable. It has solid ratings on the aggregate sites, so I wouldn't be totally blown away if it made it in, but I think the smart thing to do is have it low down in your estimations. So the last film I have is Cardboard. This is kind of animated short, or American animated short 101 in my opinion, which doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but it is extremely cookie cutter and forgettable. It's another one of those, the world is populated by animals. A father pig is bringing his 2 little boy pigs off to a trailer park where it seems like maybe they're moving after the father's divorce. Again, a running theme. Pigs this time. It is about a dad pig and his two little boy pigs who go off to live in a trailer, possibly after a divorce or maybe the death of the mother. And the dad feels really guilty for subjecting the two boys to this new unexciting life, but the two boys have a broad imagination, and out of the moving boxes they create this science fiction world populated by aliens where they have to fight to save the galaxy. And it's really cute, quite forgettable, and I think there's enough stronger animal themed shorts here that it's quite unlikely that this makes the final 5. So the first film I have, and one that I would be shocked if it were not nominated, is Rock, Paper, Scissors. So I'll give a timestamp here, quick spoiler warning, jump ahead if you don't want to be surprised going into this movie. It is based off a true story, but I understand that not everyone will be familiar with it. If not, most people won't be familiar with it. So it follows a Ukrainian boy who is fighting to keep a hideout of Ukrainian soldiers who stand the risk of being ambushed by Russian militia safe, and the tragedy that befalls his friends and family in the hideout. It is extremely gripping, extremely well made and well acted, and just an absolute gut punch of a film that I think it will be hard for the Academy to ignore, especially given the subject matter. The film is actually co-written by Yvonne, last name redacted, who is the protagonist in the film, and he died recently on the front lines after enlisting, which he was inspired to do after the events of the film. So next on my list, this is actually the one live action short that I have not seen, and it is called The Singers, but it has such strong reviews everywhere I look that I think it would be extremely unlikely that it doesn't get nominated. Maybe it's easy to get swept away in superlative Letterboxd reviews, but the top review on Letterboxd I think says one of the best things I've seen in my life. I don't know if they're trying to get on the poster or something, but yeah, both on Letterboxd and IMDb, it has extremely strong reviews, maybe north of a 9 on IMDb, and the curve on Letterboxd is primarily 5 stars. So I don't know. I will read the premise to you because I have not seen it, but it says a genre-bending short film inspired by a 19th century short story written by Ivan Turgenev, in which a lowly pub full of downtrodden men connect unexpectedly through an impromptu sing-off. So yeah, short films about music often do well. I'm remembering the short film Sing from 5+ years ago, which ended up winning. And I saw some quotes on the film's official website that it has very prescient subject matter. So I feel good about this one, but I haven't seen it, so it's kind of an unknown quantity. Who knows?
Also, quick note, it was recently acquired by Netflix. That may not be relevant, but I remember Anuja from last year had a similar trajectory going into nomination morning, and it was considered one of the front runners and was nominated comfortably. So
the next film on my list is my personal favorite. It is called Two People Exchanging Saliva. It is a black and white French film that is set in a dystopian future where kissing is strictly forbidden. People in this world choose garlic gum in order to prevent people from getting any illegal desires. People pay for items by getting slapped in the face. a certain number of times. So more expensive items will leave you really bruised up, and the rich people walk around town with huge bruises on your face. And if you do anything illegal, like kiss someone, you will be carted away in a cardboard box and thrown off a cliff. So, kind of crazy premise, but it feels very grounded and also darkly comic at the same time, of course. And I just thought the vibe and energy of this were incredibly intoxicating. The lead performances are excellent. Some character actors that I recognize in French movies, I'm forgetting her name, but one of the supporting characters in Portrait of a Lady on Fire is in this, and Vicky Krieps of Phantom Thread and many other films recently is the narrator. And the narration here, I think, works really well. I would strongly recommend this, and I don't know if it's necessarily right up the Academy's alley, but I think this is too good to ignore, and most critics and audiences out there seem to agree.
Also, I sort of buy into the fact that some voters vote based on, oh, that's a catchy title, and two people exchanging saliva certainly draws attention to itself.
The next film I have on this list is Adieu, and it stars Jennifer Lewis, who I didn't recognize but has been in very small parts in a lot of big movies that I have seen. And it is about a drama teacher who is directing Much Ado About Nothing at an elementary school, and then a school shooter comes in, and basically the question is, will she be able to talk this guy down? And it perhaps is, I guess, vague spoiler warning, but it perhaps is a bit predictable and is definitely one of those movies about the power of art. I thought it was a little bit, I don't know if far-fetched is the word, but strained believability, and it was a bit over-dramatized. And predictably, a lot of people on Letterboxd had problems with the portrayal of an event like this. But Jennifer Lewis is extremely strong in this and really carries the whole thing. And it is a moving story that I think will be hard not to connect with. It does seem pretty broad in its emotional affect. So I think that this is the sort of movie that the Academy would eat up. Next up is A Friend of Dorothy. This film stars Miriam Margolyes and also has supporting roles from a supporting role from Stephen Fry. Next up is A Friend of Dorothy. This is a British short film starring Miriam Margolyes. It also has a supporting role from Stephen Fry and some lead roles from some very talented young British actors that I didn't recognize. But I honestly was not a fan of this movie. It is hard not to be charmed by parts of it. Margulies' character is a kind of spunky senior that is very familiar but also pretty entertaining, and there is heart to it. It's well intentioned, but I found it very saccharine. It is about a boy whose soccer ball goes into Margulies' character's backyard, and she kind of befriends this boy, and she has a grandson and a son who are not very interested in spending time with her. And of course, based on the title, this is also a queer movie, but I felt like that was really mishandled and kind of seemed very shoehorned into the story. Wasn't a big fan, but that all being said, it seems to be kind of the sort of thing that is spoon feeding an Academy voter, and I could absolutely see it getting nominated. As I mentioned, the star factor of Miriam Margolyes probably is not going to have much of an effect, but I think it has that sort of accessibility and surface level charm and emotionality that I think could squeak it into that fifth spot. The next film on the list is Beyond Silence. This is a Dutch short film. It is a chamber piece, and it takes place in a meeting between a deaf and mute woman and her sister and one of the female admin at the university where the main character just graduated from her PhD, I believe, and she reveals that she was assaulted by, I believe, her professor. So it deals with this very heavy subject matter extremely well and really gets into the weeds and the complications of a harrowing situation like this, as well as the emotional and physical trauma. I think that it is hard not to be affected by this movie, and while it doesn't exactly have a narrative and is mostly just a conversation, it will certainly move most people, if not everyone, and I think it stands a very good chance of getting in. It might be just on the bubble just because of the strength of some of the other films. The next film is another Polish entry, Dad's Not Home, and this, I believe, is the winner of the Student Academy Awards, but honestly, you would not know it is made by an amateur filmmaker. I wouldn't say it's technically out of this world, but it is very competently made, and I thought it was one of the stronger entries in this shortlist. It's about two boys who live with their dad who has severe dementia, and they pretty much have to take care of him while managing their school lives and their personal relationships, and it is extremely moving, also has a good sense of humor at times, and tells a really good story. There's a strong narrative through line here which will be very accessible to the average viewer, but as I said, it's well made, well written, well acted, a strong entry, and just because it's a student film, I would not write this off. The next movie I have is The Boy with the White Skin. This is a movie set in Senegal, and it follows a albino boy who is sent down a mine shaft because there is a superstitious belief that because of his albino pigmentation, the miners will have more success looking for gold. And it is a very kind of spooky, vibe heavy art film. I don't know if that description does it justice, but I thought it was very interesting and certainly unique amongst the bunch, so I feel like it will be memorable, but I don't necessarily think it will have the broad appeal that generates a nomination. I don't know, often there is a movie that hails from Africa that makes this final five, and I would not be surprised to hear this on nomination morning. Next is Jane Austen's period drama. So like The Three Sisters in the animated category, this is one of the few humorous shorts, and it is definitely a full-out comedy. A lot of the humor is ha ha ha, old woman said a curse word. Things like this that are in this sort of self-aware, humorous tone usually don't make it in. I'm thinking back to the Anne Frank gift shop last year, but I thought that was a lot weaker. Anyway, to say a little bit about the film, as you can imagine from the title, it is kind of a riff on 19th, 18th century set period dramas. But of course, period in this case is wordplay to also refer to menstruation, and the whole story revolves around this woman who gets her period just as someone is about to propose to her. And of course, this man is very ignorant on women's issues. And the whole thing is extremely punny, which might bother some people, but I like puns, what can I say? I'm a simple guy, and Most of them I thought were pretty funny and not super cheap. All of the character names, for example, the main character is called Estrogina, and the male love interest is Mr. Dickley. It's all very silly, but it's well made, well produced. I thought it was pretty funny, and if there's a slot for something of a humorous ilk, this one could slide in, even though it would look kind of crazy next to a movie like Rock, Paper, Scissors. The general wisdom, I think, would be to not include this because you'll have enough detractors in the Academy that will write this off immediately. Butcher's Stain is next on my list, and this is about a butcher working in Israel, and one of his co-workers accuses him of ripping down the Israeli hostage posters that are put up in the break room. I thought this was quite compelling. All of the performances are strong, and the lead character, it's easy to have a lot of empathy for him. He's estranged from his partner with whom he has a kid. There's a lot of story beats that didn't quite seem believable to me.
Get ready for a haircut jump scare.
But definitely a well-made and pretty accessible short that will work on a lot of people. I'm just kind of not sure if it's as strong as many of the other shorts, and it of course that contingent of people who might not side with the politics of it might be turned off, so that's why it's down here. Next up is Pantyhose. I'm very conflicted about this because it was one of my favorite shorts easily. However, maybe I'm getting too influenced by the poor Letterboxd and IMDb reception. I think it has a 3.3 on Letterboxd and somewhere in the middle sixes on IMDb. I think it is much better than people are giving it credit for, and it's also pretty unique, so you never know. I could be totally off the mark on this, but it is a Scandinavian short, I believe, Norwegian potentially, shot in a oneer, a pretty simple oneer, and it's a chamber piece set in a house where a couple is going to some sort of posh event. What first appears to be a sort of frenetic comedy devolves into a pretty intense argument between this couple, and I thought the meshing of tone was really great. The stylistic choices, aside from a few nitpicks, were really effective, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I just am taken aback by the middling reception, so for that reason, I think I gotta put my own biases aside and say that it doesn't stand a great chance of getting nominated, but I wouldn't be surprised to hear this short's title read on nomination morning.
Maybe this is another one where it could have the added benefit of having a catchy, memorable title.
Next up, I have Extremist. This is based on a true story about a young Russian artist who makes an anti-war statement by sneaking messages into food labels at a corner store. I thought it was pretty strong. The aggregate score on Letterboxd and IMDb is okay, but not great. It has this very artful, abstract sort of ending, so that might not gel with a lot of voters. I find this category usually picks fairly safe, fairly accessible movies, but because of the subject matter, it definitely stands an outside chance. Tough to place this one, but I don't see it getting in. So next is Butterfly on a Wheel. This is a Toronto set short film about a pianist who is in the music program at U of T, and he has aspirations of greatness, but also a lot of... So next up is Butterfly on a Wheel. So this is a Toronto set short film about a pianist in the music program at University of Toronto, and he has aspirations of greatness and is very talented, but some mental health issues keep him from fully realizing his dreams. This is a very, very cheesy short. It is well made and well intentioned, but I think falls incredibly flat and is often laughable in the writing department. one Letterboxd review, I think, described it as hot guy with movie OCD, which I think is a very good description. There is a montage near the end that has some of the most laughable faux poetic narration, with our lead character on a spiritual journey in the desert where he is on his knees screaming in slow motion into the fire. That being said, some of the musical sequences are quite captivating, and the lead performances are by competent actors. You may have seen them pop up. I thought the lead was actually quite good in 20th Century Women, and the person who plays his brother, I recognize him from a supporting role in The Holdovers. But this is a pretty silly, misguided short that is not offensive in any way, but I think is pretty incompetent in the writing department. Sometimes really bad shorts make it in, and this might pander just enough to some voters to get a surprise nomination, but I think smart money says don't pick this. So we're getting to our last few spots, and I always get a bit nervous because sometimes movies that I have way down near 13, 14, 15 end up getting in, and as I say, sometimes these short categories are just almost impossible to predict, but this is my best wisdom such as it is. So the next one I have here is Amarela, which is a Brazilian short film about a Brazilian-Japanese girl who lives in Brazil in 1998, and it is set against the backdrop of the France-Brazil World Cup final going on, and this girl experiences prejudice because of her Japanese origin from some toxic fans at the bar where she watches the final with her friends. I'm a big soccer football fan, so the fact that this didn't speak to me, I think, says something about the lack of urgency, I want to say, in the movie. I just didn't really feel like the filmmakers, it comes from a personal place perhaps, but it didn't feel like a story that the filmmakers were compelled to tell. It just is a kind of window in time that doesn't really have anything strong to say despite its important subject matter, if that makes sense. Anyway, some people might totally disagree on me. It's getting okay reviews, but I don't think anyone will feel strongly enough about it to, or a lot of voters won't feel strongly enough about it to put it on their ballots at the end of the day. And last on my list, I have a unique one. It's The Pearl Comb, which is an English Gothic horror mermaid short. And I didn't think it was great, but it's, as I say, definitely unique. I just very much don't think it's the flavor of the Academy given its genre trappings. Definitely some of its more ambitious effects work was constrained by the budget, though it's not terrible, and I don't think that the voters would hold that against it, given, you know, it's a smaller production. But I thought it was a little bit goofy at times. It has a kind of fun, dark, twisty ending. So memorable enough, but I really just am putting this at the bottom of my list because I think this is very much not the Academy's flavor, even this branch of the Academy. So that's why I'm betting against it. But as you may have noticed across all of the 15 films I discussed, I don't think there's any one that doesn't at least stand an outside chance. I've just tried to put them in an order of likelihood given the Academy's taste, especially in terms of messaging behind the film. Though the last movie to win the award was I Am Not a Robot, which was just kind of a cool sci-fi piece that doesn't have much like strong prescient messaging. Of course, that's voted on by the entire Academy. Who knows? But I hope I have given you some insight into this category.
So all the empty rooms
Follows a journalist, Steve Hartman, and a photographer who go around to the houses of families of children who have been victims of school shootings, and they interview the parents and siblings, and the photographer takes some really moving images of these kids' bedrooms, which have been, for the most part, left unchanged. This, of course, is going to make quite an impact for just about anyone. I don't think it's boundary pushing in any way, but I think a lot of voters will have great admiration for what Hartman is trying to do here. Because I believe he's a personality on one of the bigger networks where, as he says in the documentary, he often finds the silver lining in stories, but he wanted to change his tack here and really just get to the heart of the tragedy that these families are going through. A moving short, Netflix produced, which, Netflix has a, pretty good success rate getting in. It definitely has that sort of Netflix sheen with the very recognizable title cards and familiar editing, but I think just based on subject matter and emotional accessibility alone, this stands a very good chance.
So I feel very confident that The Devil is Busy is going to get in there. It's about a head of security at an abortion clinic, and it's in a very hostile environment with protesters out 24/7 pretty much, with megaphones and whatnot, and the efforts that this woman makes in order to avoid any altercations. I think this is going to speak to Academy members. I can't name specifically what, but there's definitely some precedent for films with this subject matter to make it into this category. I know last year, perhaps it was 2 years ago, there was the one about the Roe v. Wade overturn that did get snubbed, so something to think about. But this is a really a really effective documentary that's well made. It's a HBO production, and they have a decent history with success. So next we have All the Walls Came Down. This is by Ondi Timiner, who's a pretty accomplished LA-based filmmaker, and it is a very personal story about the fire that devastated Los Angeles, particularly her Altadena neighborhood, as she lost her house in the fire, and it's what you expect based on that setup, but pretty effective emotionally, and the personal angle will also help. Purely on subject matter alone, this would stand a good chance regardless of the quality, but I think this is actually pretty solid documentary short to boot. Bad Hostage is one that I have in here. I personally thought this was the strongest of the 15, but putting that aside, what really works here is that it kind of functions as a very accessible thriller story at the beginning, because we're interviewing this woman who went through a hostage situation as a single mother with her 5 or 6 young kids, and you don't know how it's going to go down, but then it kind of slowly reveals itself to have a message about how police mismanage hostage situations, and their priority is not necessarily keeping everyone safe, but rather imposing their authority on the situation. And then it intercuts some other stories of similar situations, including the one in Stockholm that ended up coining the term Stockholm Syndrome, and it kind of debunks that term. I thought this was really strong. The aggregates seem to agree with me. Lots of 10-star, 5-star ratings on Letterboxd or on IMDb and Letterboxd respectively. Even if the average ratings aren't necessarily like crazy high, but I feel pretty good about this one. This fifth spot is tough for me. I've been debating three titles, especially squeaking in here. Right now, I'm going with Classroom 4. This follows a college history teacher who takes her students into a prison to conduct a class where the inmates are actually part of the class and they are considered the inside students and the students from the college are considered the outside students. And it has a lot to say about the prison system in the US. This is Oregon penitentiary, I believe, that they are spending time in. And it has a lot to say about how you will have a lot of preconceived notions about criminals and inmates, and the way they are treated until you meet them. So it's kind of bringing us face to face with these people. This is also a subject matter that often connects with the Academy. Just outside my top 5, I have Armed Only with a Camera, The Life and Death of Brent Renaud, and this is about the photo or video journalist who died in Ukraine. So I'm conflicted about this because on the one hand, no one's going to watch this and not think this guy's story deserves to be told. But at the same time, I don't think this functions very well as a documentary. It is pretty much a compilation of a lot of his footage, which really exemplifies his bravery, but there is very little in the way of a cohesive narrative or a kind of emotional through line, and it's just a hodgepodge of, as I say, footage and some talking head interviews and some clips from his funeral and stuff like that. It has decent ratings across the board, but when you read reviews, it does seem that people kind of share my sentiment, and I feel like the ratings might be influenced by the fact that people just feel bad for giving this a poor rating. So I think this is going to miss out, but I don't feel good about predicting that. So next up, this is another one I'm strongly considering, and as I say, that 5, 6, 7 spot are very interchangeable in my mind, but I have Cashing Out here, and this is a very stylishly made documentary about a complex and difficult subject that I knew nothing about. It is about people who bought out life insurance policies of folks with AIDS during the mass AIDS epidemic in America, and it's a tricky subject matter because on the one hand it was kind of mutually beneficial because these people who were near the end of their lives got got a huge payout and got to live life to the fullest in their final days, but at the same time obviously they were being exploited and their deaths were being bet on, and of course it deals with once AIDS became more treatable, the complications that arose. Yeah, I think the documentarian picked very good subjects. One of the key subjects is his father, who benefited a lot off of this sort of scheme, and the documentarian as a gay man. Obviously, there's a pretty complicated relationship with that. Sometimes I do feel like it pulls punches, and I think most viewers are going to notice that to some degree. And I thought it was a fascinating watch, and as I say, it's sleekly produced, so it stands a fairly good chance. I think the overall consensus on this one might not be as strong as how I felt. All right, so also a pretty strong contender I feel is Rovina's Choice, and this is about a South Sudanese woman who loses her child kind of as a effect of humanitarian aid being pulled back, which is related to some of Trump's policies. The subject matter is intrinsically heart-wrenching. I think the documentary is fine. It's nothing special. And I think it's going to be impossible not to feel something about this. I just don't feel like it's unique or memorable enough to make it into the final five. I think it's going to rightfully make just about everyone who watches it angry, but whether or not people will think it's one of the best in the shortlist is another matter. I think it has a 3.4 on Letterboxd, not a lot of 5-star ratings. I'd have to double check IMDb.
So, On Healing Lands, Birds Perch is a documentary set around an infamous photograph that was taken in Vietnam of a Vietnamese American ally executing a Viet Cong general. And the filmmakers interview the families of the man behind the execution, the man who was executed, and victims of the violence in Vietnam at the time. The beautiful kind of poetic theme that's implied of the title of, time taking its course and healing lands and the people who live within them that have gone through a lot of turmoil, doesn't really come through until the very final moments of the movie. And I thought it was more of an afterthought. But aside from that, I did find this to be somewhat stretched thin. It almost runs to a full 40 minutes, which is the maximum limit in these short categories. And I feel like there was quite a few segments of superfluous interview that it easily could have been trimmed down to make it a bit tighter. But it's hard not to be compelled by the very stirring stories that these people tell and to feel a great deal of empathy. I think it makes a good choice to tell this story without inserting the filmmaker's own biases into the perspectives of the family members. I wouldn't necessarily say that this subject matter demands to be nominated. Some of the other nominees have a lot more prescient subject matter to the primarily American voters, but certainly not a bad documentary.
We Were the Scenery is from the same producers as On Healing Lands, Birds Perch, and it also centers around events in Vietnam. It features two folks who were extras in Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, and they reflect back on that experience and watch bits from the film and talk about the depiction of the war and the depiction of Vietnamese people in the film. That element of Hollywood relevance might work well on voters in the Academy, but there wasn't much there for me personally, and I think a lot of people will come away with the same sentiment. See, as I'm making this list, and is often the case with this category, so many of these films are extremely heavy. So this next one is also sad in many ways, but just by virtue of the three charismatic ladies at the center of Last Days on Lake Trinity, I think just based on uniqueness factor, this one stands an outside chance. It's about three women in Florida who live in a trailer park, and they get evicted with very little notice. The trailer park is owned by a mega church, and kind of it deals with the irony of this institution that claims to care so much about people with this very capitalistic mindset. And we spend time with these women over many months, and get their insight on their current situations, what they plan on doing next, the challenges. And as I say, they're very charismatic. All three women are very distinct from each other. One of the main women, Nancy, is just incredibly endearing. So this could be kind of the bittersweet, feel good with an undercurrent of melancholy film that I could see making it in. Maybe a good wild card to think about. Definitely the most unique entry in this shortlist is Perfectly a Strangeness. I hesitate to even call this a documentary strictly, but it is a wordless film that follows some donkeys in, is it South America? I'm not sure. It could be any semi-arid place. And these donkeys wander around. They're close to a planetarium, I think. You never see a human in the film. Um, and that's about it. There's some, I actually kind of enjoyed this. The vibes were impeccable, I suppose. Some of the cinematography was beautiful. Some shot choices I thought were very incongruous with very jarring pans and zooms in a movie that otherwise felt like it had this kind of consistent flowing naturalistic camera movement. Um, but just by virtue of this being very unique, I half wonder if it could make an upset. Children No More Were and Are Gone is a documentary that follows a protest movement in Israel, or in Tel Aviv, I believe, where protesters silently hold signs in populous areas which show children who have Palestinian children who have died in the Israel-Gaza conflict. Um, Obviously, the subject matter is going to speak very strongly to some voters. Maybe it will anger that minority contingent in the academy. But even if you don't take too much stock in that, the latter contingent, I feel like this just kind of follows some of the protests and protesters and doesn't dig too deeply into the nuance of the situation. But I feel like it does one thing well and then just drags it on for the entire film. It depicts altercations and arguments between passersby, and they make some interesting points, which I guess brings some nuance, which helps with the staying power of the film's message. But overall, we start on that baseline of course, children being killed in conflict is absolutely horrific. It doesn't go too far with that. We just kind of stay with that and feel somewhat unchanged by the end. And I think that is kind of the sentiment I read in a lot of Letterboxd reviews. So, despite the subject matter, I don't think this one is going to make it in. Chasing Time is co-directed by the filmmaker behind Chasing Ice and Chasing Coral, and it is about the photographer who shot lots of that glacier imagery from Chasing Ice. Overall, it feels very much like leftovers, I would say, from a feature documentary. There is a story with the photographer getting a cancer diagnosis and them taking down the last camera of all the cameras that were set up around the world to take these crazy time lapses of receding glaciers. But I have a feeling that people who saw the feature documentaries or who saw Chasing Ice will probably say this is a lesser iteration of that. I wouldn't take any stock in the notoriety of the director's name or any of his past nominations, because that doesn't really seem to pay dividends in this category. Also, there was a bit of a weird thing with this one where there was a free version on YouTube and some other platforms that I guess was a trimmed down cut of the 39-minute cut that was submitted to the Academy for consideration. So Academy members, I believe, would have seen what would it be, 14 extra minutes roughly of the film. I was able to see that 39-minute cut, and I never saw the 25-minute one, so that's the one that I am basing my prognostication on. But yeah, just wanted to clarify that. Okay, so the last one is Heartbeat, which is the only one I haven't seen. What I know about it is it's by two documentarians who I believe were a couple, and 25 years ago they shot footage from their daily life, of some domestic disputes and various goings on in their life, and it's supposed to be kind of like a raw portrait and time capsule from their life and their relationship. This has really negative reviews on Letterboxd. At least the bulk of the ratings are half a star, but the secondary stack is 3.5. It has I think like a 6.2 on IMDb. So hard to say with this one, but just because I haven't seen it and because it has mostly negative reviews, I'm gonna put it at the bottom. I think it's a safe bet to not predict this one. I think a lot of the negative reviews on Letterboxd have to do with ethical concerns about privacy when filming. So it's up to you how much stock you take on that. But as I say, safe bet to leave it off your final 5. Just wanted to come in here to say that I might have underestimated Heartbeat. It is by a documentarian who has been nominated twice in the past in this category, I believe, or maybe the feature category. And what I gather from the Next Best Picture podcast is that it may be getting really negative reviews because he is portraying himself in the film and he comes across as a huge jerk. So that might be part of it. Yep, so that's it. We made it. Sorry that this is being released so last minute. Another kind of general comment is, as I've mentioned here and there throughout the video, I would try to have some kind of stylistic diversity in some of these categories, or at least in the live action and especially the documentary category. Maybe I would consider including one that's a little more lighthearted. Those are few and far between. I would consider that more a secondary consideration, but if you're on the fence about something, maybe it's worth having something lighthearted. But I hope this video has helped, and I will try to make one every year next year. I hope to release it a lot earlier, and have consistent production value throughout and more thorough research. Thank you so much. If you've tuned in right until the end, I truly appreciate it. Please comment below if you have seen The Singers or Heartbeat especially, or if I made any mistakes. I'd love to hear your predictions for these categories. Good luck on your predictions. Bye-bye.